The cold never bothered Marcus Webb. Every Friday after work, he'd make the drive north from Vancouver, seeking out new trails in British Columbia's endless wilderness. His wife Sarah had long since accepted these weekend rituals. He'd leave Friday evening, return Saturday night with stories and photos, recharge for another week. It was his therapy, his escape from the fluorescent-lit cubicle where he spent 40 hours a week managing inventory databases. This particular Friday in late November, Marcus arrived at Cypress Mountain just off Route 99 around 7:30 p.m. The parking lot was empty, which wasn't unusual for this time of year. A light snow had been falling all afternoon, covering the gravel lot in a thin white blanket that crunched under his boots as he shouldered his pack and headed into the darkening woods. His headlamp cut a narrow beam through the towering evergreens, their branches heavy with fresh powder. The trail was well marked initially, but Marcus had studied the topographical maps all week. He knew there was an offshoot about half a mile in that would take him to a remote area rarely visited by other hikers. That's what he loved, finding those pockets of wilderness that felt untouched, where he could pretend he was the first person to ever walk that ground. After 45 minutes of steady hiking, his calves burning pleasantly from the climb, he found it. A clearing nestled between towering Douglas firs, maybe 30 feet across. Perfect. Sheltered from the wind. Level ground. And close enough to the sound of running water that he'd have easy access to the stream he'd seen marked on his map. Marcus dropped his pack and began unpacking his tent. The familiar ritual calmed him, unfolding the poles, threading them through the sleeves, staking down the corners. He was hammering in the third stake when he heard it. Footsteps. Close. Deliberate. The distinct crunch of boots on snow. Marcus froze, hammer raised mid-swing. Hello? His voice seemed swallowed by the trees. Nothing. The silence that followed was absolute and wrong. No wind rustling branches, no owls calling, not even the chittering of squirrels settling in for the night. Just the distant murmur of the stream somewhere in the darkness, and his own breathing, suddenly loud in his ears. He waited a full minute, listening. When nothing came, he shook his head and continued setting up camp. Probably just a deer. Maybe another hiker who hadn't heard him call out. But even as he told himself this, something felt off. The silence was too complete. In all his years of camping, he'd never experienced woods this quiet. There was always something, an insect, a bird, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Here there was nothing but that eerie stillness and the sound of water. When the tent was finally up, Marcus grabbed his 2 water bottles and followed the sound of the stream. He pulled out his phone to use as a secondary light source, then cursed when he saw the screen. No signal. Not even 1 bar. He'd expected as much this deep in the mountains, but it still gave him an uncomfortable feeling, knowing he was completely cut off. The stream was about 50 yards from camp, down a gentle slope through the trees. It was wider than he'd expected, maybe 10 feet across, moving fast over smooth river rocks. The water looked black and glassy in the beam of his headlamp, except where it broke white over larger stones. Marcus knelt on the bank and began filling his bottles, the icy water numbing his fingers. That's when the feeling hit him, that primal, animal sensation of being watched. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. His shoulders tensed. He had the overwhelming urge to turn around, but some instinct kept him focused on the bottles, on the simple act of screwing the caps back on standing up slowly without sudden movements. When he finally did turn, his headlamp swept across the forest behind him. Trees, shadows, nothing. But something moved. Just at the edge of his light, he could have sworn he saw a shape slip behind a thick fir trunk. Too tall, moving too smoothly. There one moment, gone the next. Hello? He called again, louder this time. I'm just camping for the night. Didn't mean to intrude if this is your spot. Nothing. Just tired, he told himself as he hurried back up the slope to his camp. Long week, long drive. Playing tricks on you. But he couldn't shake the feeling, couldn't ignore the way his hands trembled slightly as he unpacked his portable stove. Back at camp, Marcus fired up the stove to heat a packet of dehydrated chili. The small blue flame was comforting, a tiny beacon of civilization in the vast darkness pressing in from all sides. He just poured the boiling water into the packet when the sound started. Twigs snapping, one after another. Not random, too deliberate for that. The sound was circling the clearing, moving from his left to his right, maintaining a constant distance. Marcus turned slowly, following the sound with his headlamp, but the beam never caught anything. Just trees and shadows and that methodical snapping, like someone walking a slow circle around his camp, stepping on every dry branch they could find. "I can hear you," Marcus called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "If you're trying to scare me, it's working. What do you want?" The snapping stopped. The silence rushed back in, even more oppressive than before. Marcus's heart was pounding now, his mouth dry. He looked down at his dinner, suddenly not hungry at all. The smart thing would be to pack up and leave, but leave and go where? It was already dark, the trail would be treacherous, and he'd look like an idiot showing up at home at midnight because he got spooked by some noises in the woods. Instead, he killed the stove, doused the small fire he'd built for warmth, and retreated into his tent with his lukewarm meal and his flashlight. He zipped the tent closed, as if that thin layer of nylon could protect him from anything, and sat in the darkness. Eating mechanically, listening. For an hour, nothing. Just the stream in the distance and his own breathing. Marcus began to relax, felt foolish for panicking. This was why Sarah worried about him going alone. He was overreacting, letting his imagination run wild. There were plenty of explanations for strange sounds in the forest. Animals, settling snow, the wind playing tricks. He was finally drifting off, his sleeping bag pulled up to his chin when the whispers started. At first, Marcus thought it was the wind, some trick of air moving through the trees. But there was no wind. The walls of his tent hung perfectly still, and these were voices, at least two, maybe three, speaking in a rhythm he couldn't quite parse. Not English, not French, not any language he recognized. The cadence was wrong, the sounds not quite matching any speech pattern he'd ever heard. And they were getting closer. Marcus lay frozen in his sleeping bag, every muscle tensed, his eyes wide in the darkness. The whispers grew louder, multiplying, 4 voices now, maybe 5. Speaking over each other, around each other, in that strange, not-quite language. And accompanying the voices, that sound again. Branches breaking, footsteps approaching from multiple directions, converging on his camp. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "I don't have anything valuable, just leave me alone." The whispers stopped instantly, the footsteps ceased. Silence crashed down like a physical weight. Marcus held his breath, listening so hard his ears rang. Seconds crawled by. Nothing. Maybe they'd left, maybe. Something hit the tent, hard, a rock or maybe a branch. The impact was on the right side, about head height, hard enough to make the entire tent shudder and the nylon ripple violently. Before Marcus could react, another impact on the left side, then behind him, then in front. They were surrounding him, pelting the tent from all sides, and he could hear them. Now, movement, breathing, something that might have been laughter, but didn't sound quite human. Marcus didn't think. Instinct took over. He ripped open the tent flap and ran, grabbing only his flashlight. He didn't bother grabbing anything. He left everything behind, apart from his flashlight and his boots, which he was wearing. But he left his tent, camping gear, backpack, even his phone. Behind him, he heard them coming fast. Not the sound of running feet, but something else, something wrong. A rustling, scraping sound, like branches dragging across the ground. He risked a glance over his shoulder, and his flashlight beam caught them, 3 figures weaving between the trees with impossible speed. But they weren't running. They were moving in a way that hurt to watch. Their limbs, too long and bending in ways that defied anatomy. Their legs, if those were legs, seemed to have too many joints, propelling them forward in a spider-like scuttle that covered ground faster than any human could run. And they were tall, impossibly tall. Their heads, if those were heads, nearly brushing the lower branches. Marcus screamed and killed his flashlight, plunging himself into near total darkness. Maybe they were tracking the light. Maybe if he went dark, they'd lose him. He sprinted blindly through the forest, one arm up to protect his face from branches he couldn't see, the other holding the useless flashlight. His lungs burned. His legs screamed. Tree bark scraped his arms. Twigs scraping at his legs, but he kept going, kept running, because the alternative was unthinkable. Then he saw it, one of the figures ahead of him, cutting him off. It had somehow gotten in front of him, materializing between 2 trees like it had simply appeared there. How? How is that possible? Marcus veered right without thinking, pushing his body harder than he'd ever pushed it, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Branches clawed at his face and arms, tearing his jacket, drawing blood he couldn't feel through the adrenaline. And then, through the trees, a light, artificial light, yellow and steady and beautiful. The parking lot. He burst from the tree line like a drowning man breaking the surface, stumbling on the sudden transition from forest floor to gravel. He spun around, and they were there. 3 impossibly tall silhouettes standing at the edge of the forest, perfectly still, watching him. Their proportions were all wrong heads, too small for those long bodies, or maybe too large. The shadows and distance made it impossible to tell. What was clear was that they weren't human. Nothing about their shape or stillness or the way they seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it was natural. Marcus fumbled in his pockets for his keys with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. His fingers felt thick and clumsy, and when he finally grasped the key ring, it slipped from his grip and fell to the gravel with a jangle that sounded impossibly loud. He dove for them, snatched them up, and ran for his car that had never looked more beautiful. He clicked the unlock button twice, yanked open the door, threw himself inside, and immediately hit the lock button. His hands were shaking so badly, it took 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. The engine turned over, thank God, and Marcus threw the car into reverse, not bothering with his seatbelt, not checking his mirrors. As he shifted into drive and stomped on the accelerator, spraying gravel, he checked the rearview mirror. They were standing in the middle of the access road behind him, side by side, 3 dark shapes against the deeper darkness of the forest. Not chasing him, just standing there, watching as his taillights grew smaller. As he took the curve too fast and nearly skidded into a ditch before correcting. The Squamish RCMP detachment was 12 miles away, on Loggers Lane. Marcus pulled into the parking lot at 11:47 p.m. according to the dashboard clock. The building was small but well lit, solid and real and safe. He sat in his car for a full minute before he could make himself move, before his hands would release the steering wheel. The officer at the front desk, a young woman with kind eyes and her hair pulled back in a neat bun, took one look at him and immediately led him to a private room. She brought him water, a blanket, and waited patiently while he got himself under control. "Take your time," she said softly. "You're safe here." When he could finally speak, she introduced herself as Constable Morrison and listened without interruption as Marcus told her everything. She didn't look skeptical or amused. If anything, her expression grew grimmer with each detail. When Marcus finished, Morrison sighed and leaned back in her chair. "You're the 4th person this year," she said quietly. "Same area, same descriptions. We've sent teams up there 3 times, full search and rescue, K9 units, the works. Never found anything. No footprints, except the witness's own. No camping gear left behind, even when people swear they abandoned everything. Nothing." Marcus stared at her. "My tent is still up there, my phone, my backpack, all my gear. We'll go look tomorrow morning, first light, I promise you that." "But Mr. Webb," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "Don't go back up there. Not alone. Maybe not at all. There's something wrong with that area. I don't know what, and I don't know why it doesn't show up on our searches, but 4 people don't have the same experience by coincidence." "What do you think they are?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. Morrison shook her head. "I honestly don't know. And that's what scares me." She gave him the number of a motel in town, the Mountain View, run by a retired officer who'd give him a good rate. Marcus thanked her and left, his statement signed and filed. One more in a collection that apparently went nowhere. The motel was exactly what he needed. Cheap, clean, anonymous. Marcus had kept his wallet in his pocket by pure luck, and he had enough cash to cover 2 nights if needed, though he knew he wouldn't stay that long. He couldn't. Sarah would be worried sick when he didn't show up tomorrow night as planned. The shower was the best thing he'd ever experienced. He stood under the hot water until it ran cold, watching the dirt and blood and terror swirl down the drain. He had spare clothes in his car jeans, a t-shirt, a hoodie. He always kept an emergency bag in the trunk. Sarah had insisted on it years ago, and he'd teased her about being paranoid. He'd never tease her about that again. He tried calling her from the room phone, but it went to voicemail. It was after midnight she'd be asleep, her phone on silent like always. "Hey, honey," he said, trying to keep his voice normal. "Change of plans. Coming home tomorrow morning instead of tomorrow night. Everything's fine. Love you. Love the kids. See you soon." He didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those shapes moving between the trees, those impossible proportions, that unnatural speed. He lay in the motel bed, staring at the popcorn ceiling, listening to the hum of the heating unit, and waited for dawn. At 6 a.m., Marcus checked out, declined the free continental breakfast, and drove the 18 miles home to Port Moody. He pulled into the driveway at 6:47, sat in the car for a moment, and then finally went inside. Sarah met him at the door, took one look at his face, and pulled him inside without a word. The kids were still asleep, Emma and Jake, 7 and 5, blissfully unaware that anything was wrong. Marcus was grateful for that. He told Sarah everything over coffee at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around the mug like it could anchor him to reality. She believed him. She didn't question or doubt or suggest he'd imagined it. She just believed him, the way she'd believed him about everything for the 12 years they'd been married. "You're not going back there," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," Marcus agreed. "Never. And maybe no more solo trips? For a while?" Marcus nodded. The thought of going into the woods alone made his stomach turn. Yeah, that sounds good." 3 days later, Constable Morrison called. They'd searched the area thoroughly. No tent, no backpack, no camping equipment. No signs anyone had been there at all. "I believe you," Morrison said. "I just wanted you to know that. I believe you, and I'm keeping the case open. If anything changes, I'll let you know." Marcus thanked her and hung up. He still goes camping, but never alone. Never to places he hasn't been before, and never, ever, anywhere near Cypress Mountain. Sometimes, late at night, he'll wake up thinking he hears whispers, but it's just the wind, just the house settling, just his imagination, playing tricks. At least, that's what he tells himself. Thanks for listening, Salem Night fans. Before you turn out the lights, do one thing for me. Hit that like, share, and subscribe, so I can keep bringing you more stories just like this one.